there, bibliophiles and those raising bibliophiles. Today's book review is another City Spies, Mission Manhattan by James Ponti. City Spies, Mission Manhattan is another installment in the City Spies series. This is book 5, and the mission and focus of this book is helping to protect a climate change activist named Beatriz Santos. And she's a teenage girl from Brazil, and she is advocating for the construction in the Amazon to cease. She has a big opportunity to speak to the UN, but someone is trying to keep that from happening. So the story opens in Venice, Italy, at a rally where Beatrice will be speaking on climate change and the need for action. She's a teenage girl with a lot of passion for the environment, and Rio is the one who's sort of center stage in this particular book series. So I do love how the different characters get different focuses in each of the books. And so in this particular one, we see a lot more from Rio. And he part of that is because he has his own connection to Brazil, and he's tasked with protecting her. And so he's sort of with her constantly with what's going on. And he does end up saving her initially from a boat being blown up. And so what ultimately happens, though, is that because he saves her, that becomes an impetus where the rest of the events sort of take place, because he begins to get honored by the British government for saving Beatrice. But as a spy, the one thing you don't want is the spotlight. And unfortunately, the spotlight is on Rio, which makes things a little bit more difficult for him throughout the book and actually puts him in danger. And his past is uncovered prior to him being in the City Spies. And so there is some tumultuous events related to that. Much of the plot of the story does center around Rio and him being in the spotlight, like I said, and eventually the trail leads them to Washington, D.C., where she is sort of set to speak and meet. Mother is actually the one who's kidnapped instead of Beatrice in the story, and many twists and turns that'll intrigue your reader. I don't want to give too much away, but I will say that Mission Manhattan, I'm not quite sure why it was given that name, considering that it's really like the last little bit of the book actually takes place in Manhattan. Majority of the book is set in Italy and then in DC. There's no profanity in the book. There's no unsavory scenes. In an attempt to save Beatrice, Brooklyn and Sydney do hide Rio in a girl's bathroom, but the bathroom is empty, and Brooklyn stays with him until Sydney can manage to get Beatrice in there, because they're still trying to protect her, even though at this moment she's not very trusting of Rio, which for reasons you would understand in the book. While climate change and environmental topics can be somewhat controversial, especially with, activists sort of akin to Greta Thunberg, Ponti does handle the topic and the situation really well. I think as Christians, we do have a command to be good stewards of God's creation. And while the book has that climate change sort of underpinning of Beatrice's character, the focus seems to be more on the agencies that teenagers have to be able to speak up for themselves and to do things. And I think that's a really good, important message for our readers to have, that they do have agency. They do have the ability to speak up when they see injustice or anything going on that they think isn't right and that they want to speak to. There is a scene in the book where Rio and Beatrice are meeting with a U.S. senator, and Rio is persuasive in getting the senator to at least genuinely listen to Beatrice. And so there are so many times where young people are not listened to and looked down on. And so I think it's a really good exchange in that book. So while teens do need wise counsel and guidance, so we don't want to say that they don't need those things, because they do, it also is important for them to learn independence and responsibility. And it really reminded me of 1 Timothy 4:12, where it says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for all believers in speech and conduct and love and faith and purity." And so, unfortunately, too many people do look down on our youth and believe they're incapable of great things. And sometimes that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. We often forget that 200 years ago, people of their age were probably doing more than watching Netflix and playing video games and scrolling through Instagram. So there is a balance between humility and arrogance. And so we want to be careful that our youth are not manipulated and just turned into activists. But at the same time, if they have a genuine concern that the Lord has placed on their heart, we do want to encourage them and prompt them to speak up and know that they can do things that the Lord's calling them to. Again, as I mentioned before, you do see that climate change initiative. Rio and Beatrice do meet with that senator. They go back and forth in an exchange. Both present good points. And so I think that's really important that in the book, they talk about how there are points being made. But ultimately, what's unfortunate is that the senator is not really willing to listen. And so that is brought up the fact that, like, you need to listen. One of the great quotes that I really liked from the book comes from this exchange where Rio says, facts are like this pen, because he can do magic. He's like, it looks like he's bending the pen. He says, you take one basic piece of information, but ignore the one that gives it meaning. You bully your way through it until the truth has been completely twisted. And then he goes on to say, you see, what I did to the pen was an illusion. I made it look like something it wasn't, just like your arguments are an illusion. You pick a couple facts and twist them so that you can undercut Beatrice, and I know why. You desperately do not want to talk because you know that her arguments are solid. I think that this idea can be applied to so many different other things in our world today. And so it's a great point of conversation that you can engage with your reader in. Family also continues to be a strong theme throughout the series, and that really shines through in this particular book as all of the characters are really caring for and supporting one another. And that, like I said, really, really shines through in this particular book because we do have Cairo, Robert, who is Mother's biological son, is present. And Robert even calls his mother at some point on this like burner phone that he has, and he's overheard by Paris about that. But Paris confronts him in a caring and loving way, but also stern and being able to try and protect the others. So I think that's a really great way to talk about conflict resolution and how to approach that biblically. And again, we see in the end that the reader finds out that Clementine, Mother's wife, has bugged the farm where the city spies live. And so I'm really sort of interested to see where book 6 goes. My understanding is that they're planning to have 7 books in the series. As book 6 comes out and 7, I will definitely follow up on those book series because I think it's really important. I know it can be daunting and feel like a little redundant to keep going on in a book in a series, but I often find that unfortunately that's where we need to be paying attention because you might read the first book or two, and then as the series progresses, an author unfortunately so many times will slip stuff in that you thought you could trust them. And so I've definitely been burned by that. And I'm definitely wanting to help be sort of a hedge of protection among other families and readers that they can just be cognizant of that and be aware. So obviously, so far as I've shared from City Spies, I haven't seen anything or read anything that gives me question or pause. It's a really great, clean mystery read that if that's something that intrigues your reader, they are surely going to enjoy book number 5 of the City Spies.